So whatever Dharma discourse we engage in order for it to be meaningful, the Buddha has said that of the three doors, the body, speech, and mind, the mind is principle. When your mind is directed towards virtue, then your actions of body and speech will also be virtuous. Whereas if your mind is not virtuous, then your actions of body and speech will also not be virtuous, but it can also even turn into non-virtue. And therefore, mind is said to be the principle, the most important. And Nagarjuna has said that in India in those days there were teachings which are to be practiced through a body, through physical hardship, by going through physical hardships, and also by reciting Vedas and so forth, and also by listening to some teachings. And then there are teachings which are to be practiced by using the mind, mainly the mind. And so in Nagarjuna's Ratnavali, Jewel Garland, he says this, and therefore it is very important for us to bear the correct motivation in order to listen to a Dharma discourse. And so on my part, for example, if I have the wrong motivation, instead of becoming the teaching becoming virtuous or meritorious, it would turn into something non-virtuous. And then from the side, on the part of the listeners, the audience, if you intend to listen to the teaching so that you may be able to boast to others that I have received teaching from His Holiness 14th Dalai Lama, then that also is incorrect motivation, improper motivation to listen to the teaching. And therefore, from both the disciple and the guru, we should have the right motivation to listen to the teaching. And we'll say this prayer which says, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly until I'm enlightened, and which shows the practice of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then the next two lines, which says, whatever accumulations I have created, gained through the positive practice of generosity and so forth, may they become cause for me to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. This shows the principle of bodhicitta, this altruistic intention. And so when you really feel inspired and moved by these lines, thinking the meaning, reflecting on the meaning of these lines, then you will even shed tears. Tears will well up, and it happens to many religious practitioners. And so, please don't sit here. It's getting squeezed. So in the case of Buddhism, we have the three objects of refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. So Buddha is the teacher, and what he has taught us is the means for us to overcome suffering and find happiness, because we do not want suffering but happiness, and which must be achieved. The happiness must be achieved by ourselves, and overcoming suffering also must be achieved by ourselves. And therefore, the means to do that is the Dharma itself. And therefore, Dharma is said to be the real, actual refuge. And those who have realized the actual Dharma, comprising the true cessation and true path, are said to be the true Sangha. So the Sangha has reached the path of seeing and also overcome certain negativities from within their mind, and therefore we have the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as the three objects of refuge for Buddhists. And so, of these three, the actual refuge is not the Buddha nor the Sangha, but the Dharma. And so, the Buddha is the refuge because of showing us the path, the being the teacher to us. And then the Sangha are the refuge for us in order, because they are they assist us on the path to enlightenment, as they have themselves progressed along the path and reached this stage of Sanghahood. And therefore, the Sangha are said to be our assistants, those who help us and to progress along the path in our practice of the Dharma. And therefore, when you take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, this distinguishes us from the wrong paths. So with selfish motive, if you take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, so there is this way of doing the practice of refuge with the selfish motive in order to reach nirvana for oneself alone. But then there is also the way to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha by dedicating yourself without any selfish motive, dedicating yourself for the benefit of all other sentient beings. So, although you may do practices to purify negativities and accumulate merit, but if you do that with selfish motive, for example, with that selfish motive, if you meditate on emptiness, cultivate this wisdom of emptiness, then you will not attain what is known as the non-abiding nirvana, the Buddhahood, which must be achieved only by cultivating bodhicitta, this altruistic intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so, within the teaching of the Buddha, there is a method by which one can lead to mere liberation from samsara, and which is inferior to the total enlightenment or state of omniscience, Buddhahood. And therefore, the next two lines which say, through the accumulations of so by the accumulations I create through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, shows that the path which distinguishes us from the lower path. And therefore, with this verse of taking refuge and bodhicitta, you take refuge in the Buddha's Dhamma and Sangha, and also you dedicate all the merit that you create or attain in order to benefit all sentient beings who are as infinite as the space. And so with the help of this bodhicitta, whatever practice you do, such as the practice of the perfect, or the six perfections, such as the perfection of morality, generosity, and so forth, you are dedicating all these practices to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So, when you say that I go to refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, and then also by the accumulations I create through the generosity and so forth, what we come across is the term or the word I. So, what is this I? what does it refer to? Does it refer to your body or your mind? No. Your body is your body and not you. And your speech, your voice is not you, but your voice. And also your mind is not you, but your mind. And so, in Buddhism, there is no independently existing self. Whereas in non-Buddhist traditions, other than Buddhism, they assert an independently existing I, or a self, an Atman or a soul. But Buddhism rejects that kind of independently, objectively existing self, which does not mean that Buddhism doesn't assert a self or a person. But what we are saying when we say there's no self, when we talk about selflessness, is an independently existing person or a self, which is independent from, which is not dependent on the psychophysical aggregates which are merely designated. And so the I is merely designated, which and so whenever you come across this term I, when you say I am doing this or doing that and so forth, then, and when you say these lines, when you come across this word, you should get some feeling that this I or the self, I do not exist independently, but is merely designated. And so you should be able to bring this up in your mind whenever you think of yourself, thinking I am this and that and so forth. And so when you say this verse, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, until enlightenment to the Buddha, Dharma and the Supreme Assembly, the I, yourself, is merely designated. And then the self of a Buddha and self of Sangha are also merely designated. And so a merely designated I is taking refuge in the merely designated Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So they say this verse, I go for refuge until enlightenment to the Buddha, Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulations I create through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So correct your motivation with this verse. Say it 3 times. I go for refuge until enlightenment to the Buddha, Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulations I create through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until enlightenment, the Buddha, Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulations I create through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And so, on this occasion of the great prayer festival of the month of miracles, we celebrated which is related to the miracles that the Buddha showed and displayed and therefore we need to remember the Buddha. So the way we celebrate the Buddha is not by saying that, oh, the Buddha was born in a certain clan, a small kingdom in India, and as a prince, and then he became a great teacher and so forth. But all the different religious traditions have their own founding teachers who also have left some legacy behind them. And so with regard to Buddhism, when you think about the Buddha, you must recognize who the Buddha is, be able to identify the Buddha by really reflecting on the qualities of him.
No translation. You have some translation.
그런 라디오 말해.
그게 English translation 돼야 말해. 그게. 그런데 어느 수도 이 교통령 수도에
라디오 내 얘기 말아.
이 몽골이 저 라디오 도로 어떤 윤리 주셔.
맞아요.
윤리 돼.
She's only saying there are some Mongolians sitting near him, and one monk came forward, a Mongolian monk, and he's only saying that pretend that you are teaching them, and so face them. So with regard to the Buddha, as a teacher, how we should identify or recognize a teacher is by checking their teachings, what kind of teachings they have given. And so, regarding the Buddha, he is a unique teacher amongst all kinds of teachers or founding teachers. So how that is so is, if you actually investigate the teaching of the Buddha himself, I always say that as Deng Xiaoping has said, finding truth from facts, so I always say that the Buddha's teaching is the same, finding truth from facts. So he has given teachings about the reality on the ground, and the nature of things on the ground level, and then also the path. So in the Paramita vehicle, these three are taught: the basis, the path, and the result. And also in Tantra, this is what the Buddha has taught. So with regard to the nature of things on the ground, the basis, and so which includes also the description of the nature of the mind. And therefore, with regard to psychology that we find in Buddhism, many scientists today find lots of information, and they admire the psychology that is found in Buddhism. So for many years I have been discussing with great scientists, neurobiologists, psychologists, and also health scientists who study health care. And so they find it really admirable. So where there is the practice of vipassana and shamatha, single-pointed concentration and development of insight, penetrative insight, there is much description of the mind and emotions, and therefore these scientists find it very informative. The ancient Indian psychology, very interesting, and particularly Buddhist psychology. And so when we talk about the psychology, we are actually talking about the reality and or the nature of things on the ground or the basis level. And so on the basis of this, understanding this, then we also check whether we can make transformation within the mind or not. And if there is a way to transform it, how to go about with that practice, and not merely doing prayers. And so knowing the reality of things, and as in one of the praise to the Buddha, so I don't remember the words. So just as the sunlight makes a lotus bloom, blossom, likewise the Buddha's teachings make our minds blossom.
因为是大概观摩看见的，数个就是他们之间生活在，两个大家可能是差不多。
So this is the verse which pays homage, which says, "I pay homage to the teacher, the founding teacher Shakyamuni, who actually illuminated the universe, the world, through his speech, just as like the sun making the lotus flower blossom with its rays." And so in India, when the Buddha came, there were many different philosophical schools in India. And then masters like Nagarjuna and his disciples also were lived at a time when there were all these different philosophical schools, philosophical thoughts in India, and they had lots of discussions and debate with the non-Buddhist traditions and found the truth in the teaching of the Buddha. And so Buddhism's first in Vikramalashila, Takshashila, Nalanda, and Vikramalashila, from these Buddhist institutions, many great scholars came. And also, not only scholars, but they were also realized masters. And so from India, Buddhism spread to China first, and from India to China, and from there to Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and so forth. And then also Buddhism spread from India to Tibet, and from there to Mongolia, and so forth. And then also Buddhism has spread to other countries like Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, and so forth. So today, Buddhism has also spread in places, in regions where it had not spread in the past. So people who investigate the different teachings, remaining skeptical and not just accepting things on the face value, they find Buddhism to be a system which finds searches for truth, looks for truth, or finds truth from facts. So everyone wants happiness, not suffering. But many of the problems that we face are our own creation, human creation. So although we do not want suffering, but want happiness, Shantideva says, although they do not want suffering, they run after suffering. And although they want happiness, the ignorant destroy their own happiness as if destroying their enemies. So this is why this happens is because of lack of intelligence and discernment. We are not able to see the long-term benefit. So if we see the long-term benefit, the Buddha has said that our selfish motivation, self-cherishing attitude is the source of our problems and suffering, and also grasping at some kind of independent self is the source of our problems. And these two also actually cause us much misfortune and suffering. So I know one American scientist who is a psychiatrist. So he says that when you become angry at somebody, the person whom you are angry at appears totally negative, but 90% of that negativity or negativeness is your own mental projection. It's not reality. So this is not something which is said by some Buddhist, but someone who his name is Aaron Beck, and so he may be still alive. So such a person, a psychiatrist, has said this. So when I met him, he was about 86. And in Buddhism also, Nagarjuna says that through our mental constructions, we create suffering. And so by seeing that grasping at this kind of objectively independent existence of an I, we create problems for oneself and others, and also by clinging to the self-cherishing attitude, we create problems and misfortunes for oneself and others. And so, when we talk about attaining happiness, it is for our own sake, and not for the benefit of the Buddha. So the Buddha has said, and it's actually only the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, who has said this. And just as a gold, or monks and scholars, just as a gold is tested by rubbing, cutting, and burning, likewise you should examine my teaching and accept it, and not out of your faith and devotion to me. And so, when you investigate my teaching, the Buddha said, and if you find through your investigation it's reasonable and also it's beneficial and helpful to you, then you should accept it, but not merely out of your blind faith. And therefore, as the Buddha has said, we should examine his teachings. The masters Nagarjuna and so forth have also have investigated the teaching of the Buddha and made the distinction between the teaching within the teaching of the Buddha, distinction between the interpretive and definitive teachings. And so, in the Nalanda tradition, the masters have done this, distinguishing the teaching of the Buddha into the definitive and the interpretive. And so, those teachings which cannot be taken literally because they go against reason, and therefore the masters of Nagarjuna have said that these cannot be taken literally. And therefore, the teaching of the Buddha is about finding truth from facts. And so if you think about the self-cherishing attitude and grasping at true existence of self and so forth, you will find that they are really ruinous to your own self. As Shantideva says, if you do not exchange self and with others, cherishing others, then you will not find omniscience, or you will not attain Buddhahood. Not only that, you will not be happy even in samsara. He says that what this means is that you will not find happiness even in this life if you are obsessed with cherishing yourself alone. So you should so I can't forget the word. So, 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 when you think along these lines that Shantideva has said, you'll be able to make this self-cherishing attitude rather embarrassed. And so you should memorize this verse. So the fundamental teaching is that not only thinking that you should avoid doing non-virtuous actions because it will harm you, but because it harms others, therefore you should avoid non-virtuous actions, unwholesome actions. And so the truth of the teaching of the Buddha is becoming clearer and clearer to people in the world, and especially scientists. So in America, and also it's now starting in Europe, by explaining the benefits or the advantage of avoiding doing harming others and cultivating compassion towards others. People are actually including these in secular school disciplines. So if we could actually teach people these kind of moral ethics, then it would be really helpful to humanity at large. And so, being a teaching which finds truth from facts, even those who are skeptical about religion, many of them find that the teaching of the Buddha is something that we should actually reflect, take seriously. So without actually checking what the Buddha is, but merely saying that, oh, the Buddha is a very holy person, you may be led astray by people of other beliefs. When they say something, you may think that they are right. And so if you understand the teaching of the Buddha, then it will be really helpful to you. So all the different religious traditions are very good. They help many people. So if they are not so, then people will not follow them. So despite the different philosophical views in these religious traditions, all the religious traditions teach love, compassion, tolerance, forgiveness, contentment, and so forth. So the philosophical differences are needed because of the difference in people's mental dispositions. And therefore, because these different religious traditions are beneficial to people, therefore they are worthy of our respect. So the main teaching of these religious traditions is the love and compassion. And then all the religious traditions, when they talk about their God or the higher power, all of them are said to be the God and is said to be of infinite love. And so the purpose of all these religious traditions, which have the different philosophical views, is the cultivation of love and compassion. And so you'll find Buddhism, the teachings in Buddhism, also to have different philosophical views. And so I usually say that to summarize the teaching of the Buddha, it comes down to the ethical practice of non-violence or not harming, and then which is based on the practice of compassion. Even if you cannot help others, if you can help others, even if you cannot, you should not harm any sentient beings. And therefore, we have the practice of ethical practice of nonviolence. And then the other aspect is the teaching of dependent origination or interdependence. So even if we think about the people in the world, environment, and any other matters, everything is seen as coming through dependence on other factors. So when you see things from this perspective, that they are dependently arising, that causes give rise to their effects, and therefore you'll be able to see how one should avoid and create the positive karmas because you want happiness, and how one should avoid negative karmas because you don't want suffering. On the basis of this understanding of dependent origination, and therefore all the Buddhist philosophical schools commonly accept this teaching or the theory of dependent origination. And then mainly in the Madhyamaka philosophy, this dependent origination is understood in terms of dependence between the whole and its parts. The whole is dependent on its parts and that make it up, and also that things are designated, and then that things are merely designated. So if you understand that things are relative, then you'll see that there's nothing that exists independently of other factors. And in Buddha Palita, which is Master Buddha Palita says that if things were to have any intrinsic existence, then what is the need for designation? What is use of dependence or designation? So if things were to have any intrinsic existence, an objective existence, then you could just say the body and the mind together are the person, but that's not the case. So if you were to find the person within the body and the mind, you will not be able to find the person within them. And so what this shows is that the person is designated on its aggregates, the psychophysical aggregates, and the body, the whole body is designated on the basis of its parts. So one understanding of dependent origination is this designation, dependence through designation. So if you were to investigate into the teaching of dependent origination, you will not find any logical fallacy in this teaching. Whatever an issue we may talk about in the world, everything is dependently arisen. So if you can't accept dependent origination, then there will be logical fallacies that will fall on you. So many of the scientist friends of mine also admire this teaching of dependent origination. They say that it's really true that things are only dependent. So although we are full of faults now, how you may wonder how we can become Buddhas. In the end, But if you reflect carefully, then all the faults that we have arise from the mind. And the mind itself, all different kinds of shortcomings in the mind, finally are rooted in our ignorance. And so this ignorance can be overcome. So if you do analysis, you will find that, oh, this is really true, that you can make transformation within oneself. So it may take years and years, but if you really think and give thought to this teaching, it will make sense. So the teaching of the Buddha is without any inconsistency, as Master Tsongkhapa says, because things are dependently originated. If you assert that things have some intrinsic existence in them, then there will be lots of logical fallacies within your position. So by understanding how things are dependently originated in the sense of how things are causally brought about, that the causes and conditions bring about their effects, then you'll be able to do practices based on that, which will lead you to higher rebirth in the next life. And then by understanding that things do not have any independent existence, you will be able to see how it is possible to attain nirvana. So during the time of the Buddha, of course, the Buddhism had not spread throughout the world. But today, because of lots of interaction amongst people of different countries, Buddhism has spread to many countries in the world. So the teaching of the ethical discipline of nonviolence and the philosophical view of dependent origination has lots of bearing on today's world situation. So not just leaving it to say that this is what my teacher taught me, but if you really investigate the teaching of the Buddha, then you will be able to see that there is truth in his teaching. So the teaching of the Buddha is something which can stand test of reasoning. Stand the test of reasoning. Whereas other religious traditions where there is belief in a theistic creator God, and also religious traditions which in which there is belief or assertion of some kind of a soul or independent Atma, then you will find logical fallacies within these teachings. But because they help many people, we have very good reason to respect these teachings. And so within the teaching of the Buddha, we talk about exaggeration of things and also denial of things. And so both of these are wrong views. So by avoiding or eliminating both these wrong views of exaggerating about things that do. So do you get something? Do you understand me?
아주 되기
So just keep this in mind.
풍식 싸워로 할때 라지를 지지 이런 실제로 지금 나나 생 상고스다 나 기억다 맞대왔어.
So we all think about happiness for ourselves. Even in dream, you want happiness for yourself. And because of this selfish motive, we sometimes disregard others' happiness. And in today's world, there's lots of conflict and killing because of disregard for others' well-being, others' happiness, and obsession with one's own happiness. And also, because you have this obsession, you try to avoid those who actually appear as hindrance to your happiness. And therefore, it is important for us to cultivate warm heart. So, in order to do the ceremony for bodhicitta, we did the 7-limb practice. So, His Holiness is asking people to stop distributing the edibles. So we are going to do the ceremony for bodhicitta. So those who have already got the talk, the packets containing all kinds of edibles, keep them with you. And so imagine all the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas in the space before you. So on this occasion of remembering the Buddha for his kindness, so as Master Tsongkhapa says, you who seek excellently by seeing as it is, for those who train in your footsteps, old degenerations will become remote, for the root of all faults will be undone by those who turn away from your teaching. But those who turn away from your teaching, though they may struggle with hardship for a long time, faults increase evermore as if being called forth, and for they make firm the view of self. So please kneel on your right knee to say this verse for the bodhicitta ceremony. The verse goes, I take refuge in the until enlightenment to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulations I create through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So in Buddha Maitreya's Mahayana Uttara Tantra, he goes through the 7 topics, which are known as the 7 Vajras. So these actually show the structure of the path. So the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are the first 3 topics. So the Buddha, those who have already become enlightened, and those who are on who are Sangha, and then the Dharma within themselves, which comprise of the true cessation and true path. These are our causal refuges. So the purpose of taking refuge in these 3 refuges, which are causal factors to us, is to because we have this Buddha nature, which is the reality of the mind. What happens is when you overcome this, the defilements that are in the mind, and you will be able to attain enlightenment. And then, once you become enlightened, you attain what is known as the enlightened activities. So the Master Dignaga's way of presenting the teaching of the Buddha being an authoritative person, is quite marvelous. And then we have the paths leading to the teachings for the path leading to enlightenment in the Madhyamaka teachings texts. And so, in order to benefit all sentient beings across the space, I will take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha and generate this bodhicitta. Please say this to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until enlightenment. By the accumulations I create through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. To the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until enlightenment. By the accumulations I create through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. To the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I'm enlightened. By the accumulations I create through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May bodhicitta, the jewel like bodhicitta, the supreme bodhicitta, arise where it is not arisen yet, and where it is arisen, may it never decline, but increase evermore. As long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world. So since you have generated this good heart, you should determine that you will live a good life, and please, in order to do so, repeat this. Today my life has borne fruit. I have attained a perfect human life, and I've become a child of a Buddha. So what have you said is that you will do whatever is worth doing in connection with this, in terms of the bodhicitta, and that you will not cause this bodhicitta to decline and be sullied. So with regard to the Jataka tale, so we have come to the 12th Bambo.
So
His Holiness is joking, saying that the people who are distributing these offerings should give the more tasty things to your friends.
미시바랑 편바다 대외 개발 대단 주신 리시직 개별 방로 녀외 대화당 추범매배 다와 표송소와당 개전 재관노로 차세외 응업을 찾고 주진.
So we are on this story, I think, which is the Prince of the Iron House. It says at one time when our Lord was still a bodhisattva, he looked upon the world and found it full of sufferings, of disease and age and death, and of separation from loved ones, calamities upon calamity, which beset every sentient being. Knowing that beings had no refuge, no guidance, no protection, he was moved by compassion to work for the earth's liberation. He wished to gain the highest happiness even for those unknown to him and averse to his teachings. At this time, the Bodhisattva was born to a certain royal family, distinguished by both modesty and splendor, their prosperity ensured by the affection of their subjects, oppressing their vassals, who proudly paid them homage. And so their fame and glory spread far and wide. All the citizens shared in both their joy and their grief. So it was no surprise that the child's birth occasioned a festival for the court and capital. At the court, gifts were showered upon Brahmins, more than enough to fill their strive for association with the virtues. This story may also be recounted when praising the qualities of Tathagata. So the Buddha, always intent on doing good, was a friend even to strangers in his previous existence. To fill their hands and gratify their minds. And all the royal attendants were presented with brilliant garments. Outside the palace, songs, jests, and laughter resounded with streets and blended with the music of many instruments. The heartfelt joy of the people expressed itself in merriment, dancing, and abandon. They told one another exultantly of the happy news, as though they themselves had received a magnificent gift. The happiness of the king grew even greater at their delight. The doors of the prisons were opened, and all the prisoners are set free. So His Holiness said he'll stop where he just finished. And so, what the Buddha has seen, if we look at his life, an account of his previous lives, he has seen that cherishing others is more important than oneself or others' happiness. And therefore, we should also take the Buddha's life account as a bodhisattvas as an example for us to follow in his footsteps.